I think that many of us, when we read the Bible, have a bad habit of taking verses out of their context, acting as if they were dropped out of the sky from God to us in 21st century America. And when we do that, we so often end up thinking that the verse says something that it really does not say. Great example of this is Jeremiah 29:11. It's a beloved verse for so many people, and it goes like this: "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." What do you hear when you hear those words? I think for many people, they think that it means that God is going to bring good things into your life, that He's not going to allow bad things to happen to you. He's going to protect you from things like the coronavirus or divorce or job loss, and He's going to give you a wonderful life. In fact, there's one well-known Christian author who encouraged people to declare this when they read Jeremiah 29:11. "I prosper in everything I put my hand to. I have prosperity in all areas of my life, spiritually, financially, mentally, and socially." If that's what you think Jeremiah 29:11 means, then what happens when you do go through job loss or disease or divorce? Do you just keep declaring Jeremiah 29:11 over and over until things change? Or maybe, just maybe, do you put it back in its context and ask yourself, have I misunderstood what this passage really means? Well, this is what happens when you put Jeremiah 29:11 back in its historical and its grammatical context. You find that what was going on in the time of Jeremiah was that Israel was in exile. They'd been taken off into slavery by the Babylonians. The temple had been burned down, the walls were destroyed, and they were in slavery. And there were false prophets among the people in exile saying, "Don't worry, God is going to come and He's going to destroy the Babylonians and He's going to bring you back to Israel." In response, Jeremiah writes this letter in Jeremiah 29 verses 5 through 14. He says this: "Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there and do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. This is what the Lord says: when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my gracious promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile." So, when you put Jeremiah 29:11 back into its historical and grammatical context, what do you see? Again, if you were in exile and you heard the words, "I have plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans for hope and a future," I think you'd probably think God is on His way back right away. He's going to destroy the Babylonians and bring you back to Israel. But God says that's what the false prophets are telling you. They're prophesying lies. The reality is you need to settle down. You need to get married, build houses, plant gardens, because you're going to be there for 70 years. And then after 70 years is up, I'm going to come and I'm going to bring you back to Israel. Notice, of course, that after 70 years, most of the people hearing these words are probably going to be dead. It's probably going to be their children and grandchildren who make it back to Israel. Certainly, God's idea of prosperity, of hope and a future, is a little different than our idea of prosperity, hope, and a future. If God's plan is that as a nation they'll be back 70 years from now, but individually many of them will be dead, His ideas of prosperity, hope, and a future are obviously very different than ours. So what's the bottom line for us? Those of you who have treated Jeremiah 29:11 as if it were dropped out of the sky from God to you as a promise to you, you need to read it again. This was not a promise for you. This is a promise for the Jews in exile, the Israelites in exile, telling them that they needed to settle down and be there for 70 years, but that God would eventually restore the people of Israel. Yes, it may sound hopeful when you hear the words taken out of their context, but it's not a promise for you. It was given to a nation in slavery. And if that's God's idea of prosperity, hope, and a future, 70 years in slavery, before you come back to Israel, then maybe, just maybe, we have put expectations on God that he never asked for. Maybe we're declaring things that God has never promised. Maybe if God's idea of prosperity, hope, and a future are that much different than ours, then we'd be wise to lay down our expectations and just to put our trust in God, regardless of how our circumstances go, trusting that he loves us and that he is always working for our good.